Right now, as you read this, somewhere in the dark water between two continents, a supertanker the length of 4 football fields is making its way through a passage so narrow that the captain can almost see both shorelines at once. It carries enough crude oil to power a mid-sized nation for an entire week, and it has no choice but to go through here. There is no other way. This is the Strait of Hormuz. It is 1.7 miles wide at its narrowest point, and through those 1.7 miles flows roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply every single day. But the story of this strait is not just a story about oil. It is a story about power, about empires that rose and fell trying to control it, about wars fought and wars nearly started because of it, about how a sliver of water between Iran and Oman became the most strategically important choke point on the planet. And today, in an age of rising tensions, American warships and Iranian speedboats circling the same waters, China's growing appetite for Gulf energy, and Russia's return to the region, the question of who controls the Strait of Hormuz may be the single most consequential geopolitical question of our time. This is the full story, and it goes back much further than you think. To understand why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much today, you need to understand the world before oil, because this body of water was already critically important thousands of years before the first barrel was ever drilled. For millennia, the Persian Gulf was not a backwater. It was a superhighway. Ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, what we now call Iraq, was one of the earliest cradles of human civilization. The Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, they all built their empires here, and every one of them needed to trade. They needed copper from Oman, tin to forge bronze, luxury goods and spices from distant lands. All of that trade flowed through the Persian Gulf. And to enter or exit the Persian Gulf, every ship had to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The strait takes its name from the island of Hormuz, a small rust-red island sitting in the middle of the passage like a cork in a bottle. The island is almost completely barren with barely any fresh water, and yet it became one of the most fought-over pieces of land in the ancient and medieval world simply because of where it sat. Whoever controlled that island controlled access to the entire Persian Gulf, and that meant controlling the lifeblood of half the known world's commerce. The ancient Persians understood this. So did Alexander the Great. So did the Arab caliphates. So did the Portuguese, who sailed to it from the other side of the world. So did the British Empire. And eventually, so did the United States. Every great power that wanted to dominate this region eventually fixed its eyes on the same narrow strip of water. The strait was not just a geographic feature. It was the prize. The first civilization to truly grasp the strategic value of the strait was Persia. The Achaemenid Empire at its height stretched from Egypt to India, the largest empire the world had yet seen. Its heartland, its royal capitals at Persepolis and Susa, sat at the northern arc of the Persian Gulf. The empire could not function without secure maritime trade. And so the strait became sacred to Persian power. They stationed garrisons on its shores, built fortifications on the island of Hormuz, and taxed every ship that passed, turning geography into revenue. But then came Alexander. In 326 BCE, having already conquered Persia, Egypt, and pushed to India, Alexander dispatched his admiral Nearchus on a mission to sail from the mouth of the Indus River back to the Persian Gulf, mapping the coastline as he went. This voyage, one of the most remarkable naval expeditions of the ancient world, passed directly through the Strait of Hormuz. By multiple ancient accounts, Alexander stood looking out over the passage and grasped immediately what he was seeing. This was the gate of Asia. Control this, and you controlled the commerce of half the world. He reportedly began planning a naval expedition into the Gulf before his death cut those plans short. But the strategic insight echoed forward through the centuries. For the next 1,000 years, a succession of powers, Parthians, Sassanid Persians, the rising Arab caliphates, fought over the shores of the Gulf and the passage at its mouth. The island of Hormuz changed hands repeatedly. It was raised, rebuilt, fortified, and enriched by each new master. The real transformation came in the medieval period, when Arab and Persian merchants turned the Persian Gulf into one of the most active trading corridors in the world. Merchants from Basra and Muscat built trading networks stretching from East Africa to China, driving ships south in autumn and north in spring. Ibn Battuta, the great 14th century Moroccan traveler, passed through Hormuz and described a city of extraordinary wealth and cosmopolitan energy. Merchants from India, Arabia, Persia, and Africa crowding its docks. The island was famous for its pearls, its trade goods, and above all its role as the gateway between the Gulf and the Indian Ocean. All of this commerce, all of this power, flowing through 1.7 miles of water. The modern story of the Strait of Hormuz begins in 1488, the year Bartolomeo Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope, proving there was a navigable sea route from Europe to the Indian Ocean. For centuries, European merchants had been cut off from Asia's spice trade. The Ottomans controlled most land routes. Arab middlemen dominated the sea. Europeans paid enormous markups for pepper, cinnamon, and cloves. spices that had passed through a dozen hands before reaching Lisbon or Venice. Vasco da Gama's successful voyage to India in 1498 changed everything. Now Europe had a direct route, and they intended to use it aggressively. By 1507, a Portuguese fleet under Afonso de Albuquerque had sailed into the Persian Gulf and seized the island of Hormuz. The operation was audacious. Albuquerque had fewer than 500 men against a garrison of thousands. But Portuguese cannon technology was simply superior. After a ferocious bombardment, the city's ruler submitted. Albuquerque wrote back to King Manuel I of Portugal with precise strategic clarity. Whoever holds Hormuz holds the throat of India. 5 words that captured everything. Not just India, all of Asia. For over a century, Portugal held Hormuz and extracted vast wealth from the trade flowing through it. Every ship paid taxes to the Portuguese crown. Travelers described a place of extraordinary opulence, a crossroads of civilizations where a dozen languages were spoken on the waterfront simultaneously. But empires have their own cycles. Portugal was beginning to overextend. In 1622, a combined force of English soldiers and Persian troops under Shah Abbas the Great laid siege to the Portuguese fortress. The English East India Company wanted the Gulf's commercial access. Shah Abbas wanted to reclaim Persian sovereign waters. Their interests aligned perfectly. After months of siege, the Portuguese garrison capitulated. The island fell. A century of Portuguese dominance was over. The British moved carefully into the vacuum. Not as outright conquerors at first, but as traders and treaty makers. They made agreements with the Arab rulers of the Gulf Coast, arrangements that nominally preserved local sovereignty while quietly transferring military and commercial control to London. By the 19th century, the pattern was complete. Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, the Trucial States, all signed treaties with London. The Royal Navy patrolled the Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz was, for the first time in its long history, firmly under the control of a single global power. And then came the discovery that dwarfed everything that had come before. The first major oil strike in the Gulf region came in 1908 in southwestern Persia. A British geologist who had nearly given up found one of the largest deposits ever discovered. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later British Petroleum, began extracting oil that soon powered the Royal Navy's transition from coal to oil-fired engines. Then came Saudi Arabia in 1938, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Iraq. One after another, the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula revealed what lay beneath. The Persian Gulf Basin sat atop roughly half of the world's proven petroleum reserves. Suddenly, the Strait of Hormuz was not merely the throat of a trade route. It was the throat of the industrial world's energy supply. World War II made this brutally clear. German forces drove toward Caucasus oil fields. Rommel's Africa Corps pushed toward Suez. Britain, America, and the Soviet Union jointly occupied Iran to secure supply lines. The Strait was a central strategic objective for both sides. After the war, as Britain retreated from its empire, the United States stepped forward. American planners concluded that Gulf oil was vital not just to American interests, but to Western Europe and Japan, the allies whose economies America's global strategy depended on. A hostile power controlling the Gulf was, in Washington's view, an existential threat. The first real test came in 1951. Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Britain organized a boycott. America, alarmed that economic collapse might push Iran toward the Soviet Union, joined a joint intelligence operation. In 1953, Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah was restored. But the anger never went away. It simmered for a generation. And in 1979, it exploded. The Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah in weeks. The Ayatollah Khomeini swept to power, preaching revolutionary Islam explicitly hostile to both the United States and the Gulf monarchies. And from the very beginning, Iranian leaders made one threat that concentrated every Western mind in the room. They sat astride the Strait of Hormuz, and they were not afraid to use that fact. The Iran-Iraq War erupted in September 1980 when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, believing the revolutionary chaos had left Tehran vulnerable. 8 years of horrifying conflict followed. Artillery duels, chemical weapons, human wave assaults, the bloodiest conventional war since Korea. By 1984, the war had spread onto the water. Both sides began attacking oil tankers in the Gulf, the tanker war. Iran struck ships carrying oil from Iraq-friendly states. Iraq struck ships carrying Iranian oil. Insurance rates for vessels in the Gulf spiked to levels threatening the route's commercial viability. Economies around the world were watching nervously. In 1987, the United States made a defining decision: Operation Earnest Will. American naval vessels would escort reflagged Kuwaiti tankers through the Gulf. The signal was unambiguous. Washington would use military force to keep the oil flowing. In April 1988, the U.S. Navy fought a one-day battle against Iranian naval forces, the largest American surface engagement since World War II. Iranian gunboats were sunk. Oil platforms used as military bases were destroyed. The result was decisive. From that moment, the United States became the de facto guarantor of the Strait's openness. The Fifth Fleet was permanently based in Bahrain. Carrier strike groups rotated through the Gulf continuously. No regional power could match American naval strength in the open water. But guaranteeing the Strait was not the same as controlling it. Iran had not given up. It had simply changed its strategy. Instead of trying to match American naval power directly, it began building something far more dangerous for confined waters: asymmetric capabilities designed specifically for the geography of the Gulf. The 21st century brought a fundamental shift in the strategic environment around the Strait. The 2003 invasion of Iraq had the paradoxical effect of strengthening Iran's regional position. Saddam Hussein, the one leader who had demonstrated the will to fight Iran to a standstill, was gone. The Iraqi state collapsed. Iranian-aligned movements moved into the vacuum. The balance of power tilted toward Tehran, even as American soldiers occupied Baghdad. Iran also began a nuclear program that created a new and more dangerous dimension to the Strait's story. As international sanctions tightened in 2011 and 2012, Iranian officials escalated their warnings. Senior military commanders publicly announced the Strait could be closed in less than an hour. Revolutionary Guard speedboats swarmed near American warships. The confrontation did not escalate into open war, but it forced American planners to confront something uncomfortable. Iran had spent decades preparing specifically for conflict in the confined waters of the Gulf. Anti-ship missiles were positioned along the Iranian coastline. Naval mines were stockpiled in large quantities. A fleet of small, fast attack boats had been built and trained to swarm and overwhelm larger vessels in shallow, crowded waters where American carriers could not maneuver freely. In confined waters, local knowledge and quantity can offset the quality of a superior navy. Geography rewards the defender. The Strait's own geography, its shoals, currents, and proximity to the Iranian coast, gave Tehran options that American sea power alone could not simply eliminate. The tanker attacks of 2019 made this real. Explosions damaged multiple oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman, in incidents attributed to Iranian mines. Oil markets jumped. Insurance rates spiked. The fragility of the route was no longer theoretical. Meanwhile, the shale revolution had transformed the American domestic energy picture entirely. By 2019, the United States had become the world's largest oil producer, surpassing both Saudi Arabia and Russia. American dependence on Gulf imports had collapsed to near zero. The argument for bearing unlimited military risk to protect the Strait became politically harder to sustain. The era of unchallenged, unquestioned American dominance over the Strait of Hormuz was coming to an end. What would replace it was not yet clear, but the transition had begun. Today, the Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 21 million barrels of oil every single day, roughly one-fifth of all petroleum consumed by human civilization. It also carries enormous volumes of liquefied natural gas, primarily from Qatar, whose reserves sit beneath the seafloor near the Strait's mouth. There's no viable bypass. The pipelines that skirt the Strait, Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, Abu Dhabi's crude oil pipeline, can handle, at maximum capacity, a fraction of what passes through the water. Close the Strait tomorrow, and global energy prices would spike within hours. Supply chains would fracture. Economies would contract. The effects would reach every country on Earth. This is what Albuquerque meant 5 centuries ago when he wrote about the throat of India. The throat has not moved. It has only grown more vital. But the geopolitical map around it has changed profoundly. China now imports more Persian Gulf oil than any other country, giving Beijing an enormous stake in the Strait's stability and leverage over the nations that supply it. Russia has reasserted itself across the Middle East. Iran, after decades of isolation and sanctions, has built asymmetric military capabilities tailored precisely to the confined geography of the Gulf. The simple American dominance of the 1990s is gone. In its place stands a more complex, more dangerous, multipolar competition. Multiple great powers, multiple regional actors, and a geography that has, for 5,000 years, consistently rewarded the defender who knows the water over the conqueror who arrives from the sea. Every empire that wanted to be powerful came, eventually, to the same conclusion. The Strait is the key. Control the narrow water, and you hold the world's leverage. That has not changed. It will not change. What will change is who holds the key. 1.7 miles. That is the width of the most consequential choke point on Earth. Ancient Persians built fortresses above it. Portuguese admirals died taking it. British fleets spent a century patrolling it. American warships still sail its waters today, and every single day, the energy that heats homes, runs factories, and fuels aircraft across 100 nations passes through that narrow blue corridor. The history of the Strait of Hormuz is not just a story about water, it is a story about how the world actually works. Power flows through narrow places. Whoever controls the narrows holds a lever against the world. That was true in the age of Cyrus the Great. It was true when Albuquerque's cannon echoed across the Gulf. It is true today. And if you want to understand the crises coming in the years ahead, the tensions between America and Iran, between East and West, between the old oil order and whatever replaces it, you have to start here, at 1.7 miles. If this video changed the way you see the world, subscribe and hit the notification bell. There are more stories like this one, and they are all connected in ways that will permanently change how you understand the world you live in.